We have another loaded show coming your way on today's Philadelphia 76ers Now, and we want to hit on these two stories here. Are the Sixers about to move on from Paul Reed to clear up some money on the cap? And then story number two, according to reports, Daryl Morey may be working the phones to try to find out who is going to be the power forward for this basketball team, and could it be Dorian Finney-Smith, who's currently on the Brooklyn Nets? Stay tuned for that, but first, let's take a look at our July sub-battle. Philadelphia 76ers Now has been humming. It has been the best stretch in the history of this program, and I launched this channel during the summer of 2021. The success, the views, the subscribers, the live shows, all of it has been great. And while the Boston Celtics have owned the Sixers on the floor, we are owning Celtics today in subscribers picked up since July 1st. 308 new subs to 73 subs, and they just won a championship. So let's make ourselves feel better about always losing to the Celtics in the playoffs. Let's get that victory inside the walls at Chat Sports. Let's get those bragging rights, hit that sub button, and at the end of the day, you get daily coverage of the Philadelphia 76ers. So if you love this squad, we have you covered with our coverage. Story number one, is Paul Reed gone? B-ball Paul, second round pick, solid developmental story. He was a G League sensation. His development, a little bit slow in the early portion of his NBA career. We have seen the glimpses of him being a solid player, but a couple of issues here. Number one, he's a little bit expensive on a team that is trying to free up some money because they're in need of having to stack up depth on this roster after giving Paul, George, and Tyrese Maxey max contracts, and they need some more depth. Number two, he's a little bit of a tweener, too small to be the 5, good 4, but he's not a good fit in this starting lineup alongside Joel Embiid, and there are better options out there like trading for Dorian Finney-Smith, who would just make this team so much better if you can acquire him as compared to just having Paul Reed at the 4 on this basketball team. And the 76ers right now kind of expected to waive or trade Paul Reed in order to add another power forward. Michael Scotto of HoopsHype with the intel here saying this: Philadelphia is scouring the free agent market and potential trade options to land another forward, with Paul Reed expected to be waived or used in a trade, league sources told HoopsHype. And in addition to Paul Reed being a fun developmental story as a second-round pick, he kind of carries himself in a very Philadelphia type of manner. His saying, his personal saying, out the mud. He's a diamond in the rough, blue-collar guy, always been doubted. B-ball Paul, though, has no guaranteed money left on his deal, so the Sixers very easily can clear up about $8 million in a move just by cutting him. The problem with Paul Reed here, going back to what I alluded to a little bit earlier, you think about who he is as a player, right? And I mentioned some of these things, and we'll add on top of it as part of today's talk show. Not big or strong enough to play the 5. We've seen bigger centers give him problems. He's not fast or skilled enough to play the 4, and he really hasn't developed a reliable outside shot for him to be that 4-man, given the current construction of this roster, alongside Joel Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, and Kelly Oubre. That's why a player like Dorian Finney-Smith is a player who we're going to talk about as a great trade candidate. That's why we've brought up a player like Lauri Markkanen, which does seem unrealistic at this point, but those types of players would be a really good fit on the Sixers team. Paul Reed's career stats. There has been growth here, and I don't know if Glenn Rivers did him any favors early in his career by not giving him a bunch of time and minutes and the runway to really develop. Last year, certainly a career year for him, coming off that big contract in which the Utah Jazz tried to snatch him away. 7 points per game, 6 rebounds, a block per night, 54% from the field. Those numbers are pretty good. I wouldn't mind him as a backup, but $8 million for a team that's a little bit cash-strapped, Chip. If you can free that cash flow up, it just helps you build out the rest of your roster, and the Sixers are in need of having to do that right now.
Yeah, look, Sixers, according to all reports, have about $9 million in available cap space. Right now, it's not a ton. And again, Paul Reed's making just around $8 million. So if you straight up cut him, you can save that money. You could also include him in a trade which I think is more likely that they include him in a trade for another forward, which again, we'll talk about here in a second. But I've been a big fan of Paul Reed ever since he's come to the 76ers. I mean, his development, he was very, very raw coming out of DePaul, I believe. And he's developed, somewhat slowly, but we've seen those flashes, right? He has games where you can see it all kind of come together for him, and he's able to play solid defense and have good touch around the rim.
Yeah.
And play smart. But there's also so many moments where he doesn't play smart. He doesn't have that awareness to use the skills that he does have to his best advantage. And in the G League, he was able to shoot it from the outside. He was able to shoot the three ball. But he hasn't been able to do that in the NBA. And so while I think theoretically he could play the 4 and play next to Joel Embiid, that depends on if that outside shot can hit or not. And it hasn't been able to fall reliably in the NBA. So as much as I love Paul Reed, I love his mentality, I love what he's about and what he brings to this team, I just don't think that $8 million, if they can find a useful way to spend it, whether that's cutting him and signing someone or using it as a trade piece, I think it just makes more sense to let him go. So it sucks to see, obviously just re-signed him last year after the Jazz tried to steal him away. But look, this team's competing for a championship this year, and unless Paul Reed is able to develop a jumper, he doesn't really have much of a way for playtime, honestly. So might be on his way out. We'll see what happens here in the next coming days.
Think about what has happened and what could happen for Philadelphia. You upgraded from Tobias Harris to Paul George. Massive upgrade. In pay, yes. But as far as the construction of your team, you were so much more better off with Paul George as compared to Tobias Harris. Imagine, too, if you could use some of that money that currently is being allocated to Paul Reed, and you use that to acquire Dorian Finney-Smith, how much of an upgrade that would be. I know that sometimes we can get emotional about players who we like and wanting to keep them around. What I'm worried about, putting together the best team possible. And Daryl Morey's trying to do that as well. With that, let's pop up today's poll question. What should the 76ers do with B-Ball Paul? T for trade or K for keep? Let us know down in the comment section right now. Story number 2, will the Sixers trade Paul Reed as part of a package for Dorian Finney-Smith so that he can be the 4 on this team? A lot of buzz right now that the Sixers are interested in DFS. That is Dorian Finney-Smith, and they're showing interest in him to maybe be the 4-man for this team, which would complete their starting 5, by the way, I would imagine. And it would be Tyrese Maxey at the 1, Kelly Oubre at the 2, Paul George at the 3, Dorian Finney-Smith, otherwise known as Dodo, at the 4, and then Joel Embiid at the 5. It's one of the best starting 5s in the entire NBA. The Sixers already have the highest scoring big 3 with PG, Maxey, and Embiid from last year. Michael Scotto once again from HoopsHype on this front. The 76ers have exploratory interest in trading for Nets forward Dorian Finney-Smith, league sources told HoopsHype, but nothing is considered imminent there. Well, Daryl Morey, I want things to be imminent. No sleep till Finney. He is a perfect 3-and-D wing to start at the 4. He can guard multiple positions. He can knock down that corner 3. He's very active on both ends of the floor. He fits seamlessly. I think back to how he played on a star-studded team a couple of years ago that made it to the Western Conference Finals with the Dallas Mavericks. Luka Doncic, Jalen Brunson, Dorian Finney-Smith hit big shots during that playoff run. He had a lot of big defensive sequences, and the numbers don't necessarily scream at you, right? But this is a player who's going to score it a little bit. He's going to fit in seamlessly. He's going to rebound the basketball. He's going to play hard. His three-point numbers the last 2 years with the Brooklyn Nets have not been great. 33.7% and 34.8%. There's a reason for that. The Nets have had an awful team. So Dorian Finney-Smith has not gotten the looks that he was getting previously with the team like the Dallas Mavericks, and look at what he did when he was on a better squad. He comes to Philadelphia, he's on a better squad. He was a 39% three-point shooter. I think that he can get back to that type of production. His advanced stats in 2023, 2024. Again, I expect these numbers to be on the uptick when he's playing on a better team because teams aren't going to be focusing on him. They're going to be focused on Paul George, Maxey, and Joel Embiid. Catch and shoot three-point percentage, nearly 35%. You'd like for that to be higher. I think it could be for Philadelphia. This is projecting here, but teams have to project for what a player could become if you're looking at him as a trade candidate. Corner three-point percentage, 34.5%. Above the break three-point percentage, 35.2%. And then his true shooting percentage, 54.5%. Philadelphia could also use the decline in numbers to their advantage in their negotiations with the Brooklyn Nets and say his numbers haven't been the same from when they were a couple of years ago. According to reports, you turned down 2 first-round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith 2 years ago. We're not going to give you 2 firsts, but we'll give you a first in Paul Reed. I think that gets the job done. Another part of this is that for the player that you could be getting in Dorian Finney-Smith, if he plays up to his potential, he's very affordable. I'm willing to pay this salary, this money, for a player who can defend multiple positions, who fits in on the offensive end of the floor, sub $15 million for 2024-2025, and then $15.3 in 2025-2026. What have the Sixers also talked about? Having continuity, having some of the same pieces around together for a couple of years. There's been so much movement, so much roster fluidity under Joel Embiid throughout his entire career. He just wants to build camaraderie and continuity with his teammates. Now you can start to have the makings of that. You signed Paul George to a 4-year contract. You signed Maxey to a max, right? You signed Kelly Oubre to a 2-year deal. Second year player option, but still Andre Drummond, 2-year deal. Second year is that option. Dorian Finney-Smith, 2 years left on his contract. So you know over the next 2 years what your team pretty much is going to be. Here is our Dorian Finney-Smith trade idea, by the way, and let us know what you think about it down in the comment section here. 76ers get Dorian Finney-Smith, and then the Nets get Paul Reed because they play the same position. Him alongside Nick Claxton, not the best fit, but he can be your backup 5. He could be a starting or backup 4 on a bad team. And then you give up a 2026 first-round pick. And that pick, you also have the Clippers picks at your disposal. And the Nets are in a position right now where it looks as though they're going to rebuild. So you have some flexibility with what you could give up as far as the draft compensation for DFS. Chip, Dorian Finney-Smith. Not the player that Lauri Markkanen is, but maybe in that next tier or a tier below.
Yeah, look, I think he'd still be sort of that perfect missing piece in the Sixers starting 5. Every team, every championship team needs these guys that are low maintenance on offense. They don't need the ball. They don't need to be scoring all the time. And they can play defense. And that's what DFS does, you know. Again, we talked about how the numbers with the Nets haven't been good. They haven't had a true point guard to set up other players. They've been rocking with Cam Thomas, who is a score-first guard. They've been trying to make Michael Bridges more of a playmaker, but he's never really been that as well either. So I think, again, it will be more similar to when he was with Dallas, shooting close to 40% from 3. He's going to get a lot of wide-open looks playing with the Sixers. Maxey, Paul George, Kelly Oubre, Joel Embiid. They're all going to draw all the attention. And hopefully, the hope is that Dorian Finney-Smith can stand in that corner, stand above the break, catch and shoot, knock down those threes. But again, I think most importantly, it's that defensive versatility. He can guard 2 through 4 realistically. He's not going to cost you too much. You know, would the Nets want 2 first-round picks? Maybe. Would I be willing to do it? Maybe they'd be willing to do it if instead of just the Sixers first, you included just the Clippers first, which at this point could be a very valuable pick in 2028. You know, would they ask for Ricky Council? Then is that like, do you want to give up Paul Reed and Ricky Council? It's tough, but again, you're a team trying to win a championship, right? And I think Dorian Finney-Smith is a player that all teams covet, 3-and-D wings that are reliable, that are pretty cheap for the most part. So Sixers have interest. I think it all makes sense when you consider they're trying to move Paul Reed. They're interested in Dorian Finney-Smith. I would predict a move happens. We'll see what the compensation might be. But Dorian Finney-Smith, could he be the last piece for Philly? We will find out.
So that trade that we just showed you, the trade that we discussed, let's pop it back up here and ask you what you think. I see Walter Miller in the comment section live on our show saying, I would just do a player-for-player swap. But for Dorian Finney-Smith, I don't think the Nets take that. That's why I think you include the first rounder here. Would you make this trade? Sixers get Dorian Finney-Smith, Nets get Paul Reed, and a 2026 first rounder. Type A for accept, D for decline. As you venture down to get those votes in, make sure you subscribe to the channel. The best stretch in the history of Philadelphia 76ers now. Be a part of the movement. Hit that sub button right now, and don't forget to turn on those notifications. Therefore, anytime we go live, anytime we push out a show, you'll be notified.